The Nutty Putty Trap. On the 24th of November 2009, 26-year-old medical student John Edward Jones descended into the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah with his brother and a group of friends. John had explored caves before, but that evening he entered a narrow passage known as the Birth Canal. He believed he was choosing the correct tunnel, but the shaft he slid into became tighter and tighter until he could no longer move his hips. Within seconds, he was trapped upside down, his arms pinned beside him, his chest compressed by solid limestone. Rescuers arrived quickly, crawling into the cramped darkness with headlamps cutting thin beams across the rock. They attempted to pull him backward with ropes anchored deep inside the cave, but because of his inverted position, every breath became harder. The rock pressed down on his ribcage, and the blood rushing to his head added intense pressure behind his eyes. Hours passed as rescuers drilled bolts into the walls and tried improvised pulley systems, each attempt causing John pain as the angle shifted his entire body weight against his lungs. The cave air grew warm from the rescue team's effort. Dust drifted with every movement, settling on John's hair and his trembling gloves. Still, he spoke to them gently, thanking them, apologizing for causing trouble, hoping he could wiggle free. But the stone held him without mercy. The longer he stayed trapped, the more his organs struggled. Just after the 28-hour mark, his breathing slowed, then faded. The rescuers continued pulling for several minutes, refusing to accept the silence. When they finally stopped, the dim, uneven walls seemed to close in. John remained where he had been pinned, permanently sealed in the rock that had taken his final breath. Nutty Putty Cave was later closed forever, leaving his resting place deep beneath the Utah desert. The Garden Collapse. In northern France in the summer of 2005, 60-year-old Michelle Foulon spent her afternoon repairing a small water pit in her backyard. She leaned over the edge, scooping loose soil into a bucket. Her husband was only a few meters away inside the house, unaware that the ground beneath her feet had begun to shift. Without warning, the wall of earth caved inward. The soil collapsed in a heavy rush, dragging her waist-deep and then chest-deep before she could shout for help. Dirt swallowed her legs, pushed up her arms, and pressed against her ribs. A neighbor heard her muffled cry and rushed over, finding only her head visible above a mound of shifting soil. They called emergency services while trying to dig, but every handful removed caused more earth to slide downward. Firefighters soon arrived with shovels and boards meant to reinforce the collapsing pit. They worked on their knees, sliding wooden planks into place to hold the walls back. Michelle tried to stay calm, but the pressure on her chest increased as the ground slowly tightened around her torso. She gasped between shallow breaths, her eyes wide with fear as the soil crept closer to her chin. Rescuers dug frantically, but the earth refused to hold shape. Every movement caused the pit to sink a little more. When they finally reached her shoulders, her breathing had already weakened. Despite the efforts around her, the lack of oxygen and the pressure on her lungs became too much. By the time her husband stepped outside and saw the scene, the rescue had shifted into a recovery. The backyard remained eerily silent afterward, the boards still bracing the raw opening in the soil. It looked like an ordinary garden, calm and harmless, hiding the sudden tragedy that had unfolded there. The New York Trench. On a chilly November morning in New York City in 2016, a construction worker named Carlos, age 34, entered a narrow trench dug alongside a residential street. He and his co-workers were laying pipes, a routine task they had done many times, but city inspectors had already warned the site for lacking proper support walls. The soil was damp from recent rain and unstable. Carlos stood at the bottom of the trench with only a small ladder behind him. The trench walls rose more than 3 meters high on each side. He passed a length of pipe upward to a coworker, and in that same moment the ground shuddered. A deep cracking sound echoed through the void, followed by a thunderous collapse. Soil and debris rushed in like a wave. The force threw Carlos onto his back, burying his legs, then his torso, then his face in a suffocating mass of dirt. Co-workers screamed his name as they jumped into the pit, digging with their bare hands. But every handful they removed caused more earth to fall, forcing them back out. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, setting up boards and vacuum equipment to remove soil. They struggled to stabilize the crumbling trench, while the street filled with sirens and the sound of metal tools striking earth. The rescuers dug until they found Carlos's helmet, then his arm, and finally his chest, but his body showed no movement. The collapse had smothered him almost instantly. City officials later described the trench as a death trap. It was filled in and sealed, leaving behind only a flat patch of earth between buildings, a small space where an entire life had disappeared in seconds. The Florida Sand Cave. On a sunny day in Florida in 2014, 11-year-old Caleb built a sand tunnel with friends near a beachside dune. They carved out a hollow big enough for him to crawl inside, laughing as the warm grains slipped between their fingers. To them it was a fortress, nothing more than a playful construction in the soft shoreline. But sand is unpredictable, especially when tunneling. As Caleb wriggled into the small chamber, one of the supporting walls thinned. The weight above shifted. With a dry, soft rush, the entire roof collapsed. Sand poured over his back, filled his mouth, and pressed his body flat in an instant. His friends panicked and shouted for help as they tried digging him out, but their frantic movements only caused more sand to fall. Lifeguards sprinted across the beach, followed by off-duty firefighters who happened to be nearby. They formed a circle and dug carefully with their hands, moving sand outward while others sifted through the pile with mesh screens, trying to find any sign of Caleb. The sand was deep and dense from moisture below the surface. Every handful revealed nothing but more sand. Minutes passed, then longer. Finally, someone uncovered a small patch of fabric. Rescuers dug faster until they exposed his shoulders and head, but he showed no signs of breathing. Despite immediate attempts to revive him, the weight of the sand and the lack of oxygen had been too much. The beach fell silent as paramedics carried him away. The tide crept in slowly afterward, smoothing the sand as if trying to erase the evidence of what had happened. The avalanche burial. In the mountains of British Columbia, on the 15th of March 2010, 26-year-old snowboarder Ryan and two friends hiked off-trail to untouched powder slopes. The sun was bright, reflecting off the snow in sharp glints that made the ridge shimmer. They took turns carving down the steep hillside, leaving long white arcs behind them. Ryan rode last. As his board cut across the upper layer of snow, a fracture line snapped across the slope with a loud crack. The surface sheared away beneath him. The entire hillside began to slide, a growing wave of snow pulling him downward. He shouted as the avalanche swallowed him, tumbling him end over end in a violent white roar. His friends watched helplessly, already grabbing their avalanche beacons and probes. The slide settled in a broad, heavy field of debris more than a meter deep. They listened for the soft beeping of Ryan's beacon, triangulating the signal. Their breaths came in short bursts of panic as they planted their probes into the snow. The metal rods struck something firm. They dug desperately with shovels, cutting into the dense, icy snowpack. They reached Ryan's glove, then his sleeve, then finally his helmet. When they uncovered his face, it was packed tightly with snow. He had been buried for more than 15 minutes, and the cold weight had crushed the air from his chest long before they reached him. Ski patrol arrived shortly afterward, but the mountain was already quiet. The slope stood still again, calm and white, as though nothing had disturbed it. The Kerala Sand Wall. In the Indian state of Kerala, in 2015, a group of workers gathered at the base of a steep riverbank, digging sand illegally for construction companies. Among them was 30-year-old Jitin, who had taken the job only weeks earlier to support his family. They used shovels and baskets, moving quickly before local authorities could arrive. The riverbank towered above them, towering like a vertical cliff of loose, sun-baked soil. Workers carved out chunks from the base, creating an overhang that grew deeper every hour. Some warned that the wall was unstable, but the pressure to finish the load pushed them forward. Then, during the late afternoon heat, a deep rumble rolled through the ground. The towering wall of sand trembled, cracked, and collapsed outward. Jitin and two others had no time to flee. The mass hit them with the force of a landslide, burying them under tons of shifting earth. Surviving workers screamed for help and dug until their hands bled, but the sand kept filling the hole faster than they could remove it. Heavy equipment from the nearby town arrived, but operators struggled to lift the unstable layers without risking another collapse. Hours passed before they reached the miners, but the weight and suffocation had already taken their lives. The site was abandoned afterward, a collapsed ruin of sand with deep scars showing where the workers had been digging. The local river flowed quietly beside it, carrying small grains toward the ocean, indifferent to what had happened. 4 days underground. In Zimbabwe, in 2013, a group of miners descended into the Booby gold mine, a narrow, dimly lit set of tunnels carved into unstable rock. Among them was 27-year-old Blessing, who had worked in the mine since he was a teenager. That morning the air felt unusually heavy, and the wooden supports creaked as the shifts began. Deep inside the mine, where only flickering headlamps illuminated the walls, Blessing heard a crack like snapping timber. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then the tunnel shook violently. A section of roof collapsed beneath tons of rock. Miners shouted as darkness exploded around them. Blessing dove behind a support beam, but the ground gave way and buried him up to his waist, pinning him tightly. He shouted until his voice grew hoarse. The air was thick with dust. He tried to pull himself out, but jagged stones pressed his legs to the floor. Hours passed, then a full day. He conserved breath, listening for any signs of movement above. Hunger gnawed at him, and thirst dried his mouth until he could barely speak. His lamp eventually flickered out, plunging him into complete darkness. Rescuers worked from the surface, clearing debris slowly to avoid triggering more collapses. They drilled ventilation holes, and faint drafts of air reached Blessing, giving him enough hope to keep calling out. On the fourth day, rescuers broke through a wall of rubble. Their headlamps cast long beams across Blessing's dirt-streaked face. He was weak, barely conscious, but alive. They freed him carefully, lifting rock after rock until his legs were visible. When they pulled him out, he clung to their shoulders, gasping at the sudden rush of fresh air. Outside, the morning sun reflected off the mine entrance, marking the end of an ordeal that had nearly become a burial alive.